everyone. Pastor George with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at Habakkuk 3. So, picking up where we left off from Sunday, right? Habakkuk is a oracle that is given to the prophet to warn the people of Judah that Babylon is being raised up to destroy the nations that are doing wrong things. So that would include Assyria. It also includes Judah. And part of the back and forth that Habakkuk has is like, okay, why are you allowing this to happen? And the Lord responds by saying, it's going to happen, but my righteous will live by faith. Basically, I'm going to preserve the people faithful to me, even though the world around them is going to be destroyed, right? Metaphorically, of course. The world wasn't actually destroyed, but the way they knew everything was going to be gone, right? There is not going to be a kingdom of Judah anymore. So as it goes on, you have God give woes to the people of Babylon for all the things they're doing wrong. And it ends with a psalm. And so when you get here and you read Habakkuk 3, you're going to notice it looks a lot like a psalm. It even ends with this like a psalm, right? To the choir master with stringed instruments. This is usually a way that if you read the Psalms, you'll be familiar with as a way of people describing the music that's going on. And so what is this psalm about? Well, actually, this, like many other psalms that we have and other songs in the Old Testament, is a historical psalm. And the reason it's a historical psalm is because of what it is talking about, what God has done. So when it's going to be talking about oppressive powers in the Old Testament, there's one person, one group of people that always are kind of given as the ultimate example of the justice and how God fights for his people. And if you read this, you probably will be able to tell what it is, but if you can't, it's Egypt, right? So if you know the story of Exodus, right, the Israelites are fleeing from the Egyptians after God has freed them, and then the Pharaoh and his army marches out to stop them, and God destroys them in the Red Sea. And that's what this is recounting. At least the first 15 verses of it are about that, right? It talks about how God comes out of Taman and Paran. Those are places to the east of Egypt, out of the Sinai Peninsula, and he fights a battle. And of course, like when you read that, it's not as though it's an actual battle, like where God was shooting arrows at people, but it's showing how God fights for his people in ways that people at this time understand, right? So he has a chariot, and he uses these raging waters. The deep gave forth its voice; it lifted its hand on high, right? So when God goes to fight, all of nature stops. And at the end, right, what does it do? It says that he crushed the head of the house of the wicked. And so he destroys the wicked nations that are trying to harm his people, his elect, right, the people he has chosen. And so he's going to protect them from what is going to happen. And this is really important within the context of Habakkuk because, again, right, Habakkuk is about this evil nation that is going to rise up and is going to be used by God to bring down other evil nations. And there's a back and forth, like, how can God allow this? But God isn't just passive, right? It's not as though he doesn't know what's going on or he can't do anything about it, right? He is going to preserve his people. There's that famous verse, chapter 2, verse 4 of Habakkuk, where I pointed this out to us on Sunday, that this is quoted 3 times in the New Testament, right? Behold, his soul is puffed up, it is not upright within him. And then the second part of the verse, but the righteous shall live by faith. And that's used by Paul. It's used by the author of Hebrews, who could have been Paul, could have been someone else, to talk about how Christians live through faith, right? Faith in Christ. But also, I think that this is the promise that God is not going to abandon us when we are in the midst of trials and tribulations, right? That's what Sunday was about. But here, right, like you see that kind of lived out into the history, right? Because the part of the reason of these stories, the reason God tells his people to inscribe these things on their doorposts and make them like things that you tie around your arms and stuff like that, is because he wants people to remember what he has done, right, for them, because that is going to be your rock when things are hard, when things are going to be difficult. So God has crushed the wicked before. What he's going to do to Assyria and Judah and eventually to Babylon is not new. He's going to do that again. but we have to hold on to who we are in the midst of that and hold on to God. And that's where the end of this psalm goes, right? He is scared at the end, right? He says this, I hear this and my body trembles, my lips quiver at the sound, rottenness enters into my bones, my legs tremble beneath me. So he's scared about these things that are going to take place. But he says, yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. These are the Assyrians, right? And you could even take this and then say this is also the Babylonians, right? Like it's because they're also going to be grouped into this group that God is going to attack. And then he talks about things going badly. And this is where you see the righteous will live by faith aspect, right? Though the fig tree not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the oil fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there would be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. I want to pause there, right? Because this is something that we might not necessarily like connect to at all that much on a deeper level. But one of the things I want to, only because we're not farmers, right? But like think about this is like if the economy fails, if if we lose internet, if we lose cell phones, right? If everything falls apart, right? There's massive inflation, right? I will still hold on to God, right? Because that's the righteous living by faith. Because if all those things were to happen, it feels as though the world is crashing down around you, right? All of your sustenance is gone, things that you looked for keeping you alive and things like that, right? You still trust in God beyond all that. That's the righteous living by faith, right? God will preserve his elect. And as we see throughout the Bible, right, does that mean always that they won't die or something like that? No. Although it also means that they can, he will protect them from that sort of thing. So we need to be consistent in seeing that God cares for the people who are attached to him, right? And then it ends, right? God, the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on the high places, right? So the deer are able to go up the mountains and stuff like that. So even in the face of all of this, right, we are still we can still have strength and confidence. And that's the end of the book of Habakkuk, right? It just says, hey, this is the end all, right? It's difficult wrestling with God through these moments, but he cares about us and he's not going to abandon us as he hasn't abandoned his people in the past. So that's what we talked about today. I hope you found that interesting. I'll see you tomorrow for an episode of a new thing. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.